Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynic Alex, and I have a brand new 7 Deadly Sins Grand Cross tier list that I want to share with you guys today. I stayed up all night working on this with some people in the community, so I really hope that you enjoy it. And I got a lot of inspiration and a lot of the ideas from the tier list that I've been working on for years in Marvel Future Fight, so hopefully I can bring those ideas and that value to you here in 7 Deadly Sins Grand Cross, and we can make the best of it. So, jumping into the tier list here, I want to explain what all of the legend means and the icons, and then go into the details of how I ranked these characters and how I see their value. But of course, the standard disclaimer for all of these tier lists, it's just what my opinion is. In this case, it's my opinion plus a couple of other people that I value their opinions of, but no one player knows this game 100% and can 100% value every single character, in every single situation. Everyone's going to make mistakes. Everyone has their own opinion. Some players value certain characters more. Some players value those characters less. So you feel free, and you're free to disagree with the tier list, make your own tier list, but just keep in mind that these are just my opinions, not forcing you to play this way, but just giving you sort of how I see things, and you can take it or leave it. So, starting off with up here at the top where the icons are and the symbols, I wanted to denote the most important facets of characters and the main value that certain characters bring to the table. So the double hands, the hands that are sort of shaking, would be like a strong association. Now, of course, every character in the game has an association to another character, but certain characters have a very strong association in terms of having a fate attack or a very high and very valuable stat. For example, Blue Gila, she has a very important association with Hauser because you want to give Hauser a lot of pierce, so he's missing attack. So Blue and Red Gila, although they're not a fate combo or a fate association, they are going to give him attack, and so that can be really helpful. And then, of course, although SSR is going to give you more stats overall, it's much easier to get that 10% bonus for a SR character or a rare character than it is for an SSR, because it's the alt level, and so you have to consider that. So Hauser technically, creates multiple high value associations, but in my opinion, the two highest value associations are Green Gil Thunder, because he's a very good character and he's also SR, so it's easy to get to 10%, much easier than Red Gil Thunder, and then Blue Gila. So those are the two things that I considered when I started giving characters out the association ability and the little icon. I considered whether or not the character, first of all, had a high value stat to give. So for example, Green Gother, who is down here, gives 20% pierce rate to Escanor, and maybe just Escanor, which is amazing, right? So even though Red Gother and Blue Gother have that exact same association, you don't want that. I mean, not that you don't want that, but it's going to be much harder to get your Red Gother or your Blue Gother to 6/6 than it is for Green Gother, and so you have a situation in which one of them sort of takes precedent over the other, and that's what I tried to do, because otherwise you would have most of the characters on the tier list having the strong association, and then it wouldn't really sort of try to teach you why. Like, why is it better to use Blue Meliodas? Not necessarily better, but why is it much easier and much cheaper to use Blue Meliodas as an association than Green? Well, of course, it's the rare versus SSR, the SR versus SSR value comparison for getting those alts to level 6. So obviously, if you wanted to include all of the versions of the characters, then you would just do that here, but I just prioritized the ones that are easiest to get. There are some SSRs that I did place the strong association on, like Green Merlin and Red Hauser, because their alt levels are much easier to get, either through the Platinum or the Gold coin shop. And same thing goes for characters like Red Arthur, etc. And then also Red Gila, even though she basically overlaps with Blue Gila, and so she doesn't necessarily have that issue, or you don't necessarily need both, but it's just there in case you need it. So that's essentially what I wanted to do there. There may be some others missing, like for example Blue Hendrickson, but we'll get into that later. As far as the little icon here with the bullseye, that's high single target DPS. So if you're trying to target one character and do a tremendous amount of DPS with your regular skills, that's what it is. For both the high DPS and the high AoE, I figured that it wouldn't really make sense to include the ultimate abilities. Now, some people may disagree with me here, but basically every character, when their ult gets to 6/6, it's probably going to do high damage, either single target or AoE. So it's really not going to be helpful if every single character has these two icons. You have to sort of make them more rare in order to really illustrate why certain characters have it. So for example, Green Escanor is sort of like the pinnacle, or one of the pinnacles of crazy single target damage. So you need to illustrate why that is. Of course, his ult deals crazy single target damage, but there are other characters whose ults at 6/6 will deal good damage as well. not as good as Escanor, but you're talking like 10, 20,000 difference. It's not really going to, you can't really illustrate that in a tier list without having multiple icons for the same thing and having it tiered by the icon. It just gets complicated and messy. So yeah, these icons here do not count your AoE on your ult, or your single target damage on your ult. It only counts your first 2 skills. And then we have the crown for team unique. These are any unique abilities that will apply to the team. So something like, let's see, Benimaru's passive or his unique, it does not apply to the team. It only applies to Benimaru, so that's not going to be a team passive or a team unique. But then, for example, on the flip side, you have someone like Red Gowther. Red Gowther's unique obviously applies to all allies, so that's amazing. I also included any sort of passive that will do something negative to the enemy team, because if it's doing something negative to the entire enemy team, then your entire team is still benefiting from it. So someone like Deldry is a good example. She will give you that charm effect with missing skills, or Galland with Galland's game. So those effects will create sort of a buff for your team, which is essentially still a team unique or a team passive, because it helps your entire team out. So I wanted to also illustrate that with the little crown. There are 2 characters that I'm not sure of with the wording. I may be missing some others, but Blue Hendrickson and Blue Arthur, I am just not sure if they're passives. I didn't check a YouTube video or anything like that. I'm just not sure if their passives apply to the team or not. The wording is a bit awkward because it does have the same wording as someone like Green Hendrickson, but his Pierce passive does apply to the allies, even in the sub slot. Keep in mind that this team unique icon does not differentiate between ones that apply in the sub slot and ones that do not apply in the sub slot for things like PvP. So, Green Valenti has it, even though hers has to be active. And then, for example, Blue and, or not Blue, Green Lilia, for example, has hers even though she can be in the sub slot, or Green Gilthunder, and still be providing that crown passive. Heal is pretty straightforward if you have Healer Cleanse. And then the last 2 here, I wanted to ask you guys about this. There's one missing that you guys can't see. I'm going to bring it over here. Dies easily and low DPS. I had these icons on my Marvel Future Fight tier list, but I wasn't sure if they were going to be helpful for this tier list for Grand Cross. Not that many characters, to be honest, pop out at me as being characters that die easily. Maybe like Green Hellbrum and Green Jericho. And there's a few others, but there's not a substantial list of characters that die easily. And same thing with low DPS. There's not that many characters that have really low DPS. I mean, there are some, like Milim is really low DPS unless you have her ult, right? Her base skills do really, really low damage, really low multipliers. Valenti is another example of a character that has very low damage besides her ultimate ability. So I want to ask you if you guys want this to be included in the tier list or not. I can have it included or not. And then if you guys have any other ideas for any other icons, you can let me know as well. So that is the explanation for what these little icons mean next to all these characters. Now let's get into the tiers. So the way that I see it, the way that I tried to rank it, obviously the best tier is here, the best characters are here, and then it goes to the left, to the right, sorry, left to right, and then the worst characters are down here. I actually don't even have a tier here for Jude, Frisia, and Greenhauser. These characters are just like, I don't even know. I mean, every character has value, of course, but in terms of you using them, fat chance. When the reverse stages come, you may use Jude and Frisia a little bit, but even then you have other better reverse stage characters to use for chapter 10. But yeah, so the tiers, I just gave them different names. It's not necessarily, there isn't necessarily any meaning behind these names, but obviously, Sin tier sounds cool. Exalted tier is sort of a nod to Path of Exile. Then we've got the Holy Knights, we've got the Knights, then we've got the Squires. Now, the way that I tried to see it is the Sin tier really has to be reserved for characters that are just God tier, like just amazing in anything. Any piece of content, anything you want to do, you can just put that character on a team and they will do well. I mean, there are obviously some exceptions. For example, if the character is just straight up banned from certain content, or if they have a massive negative multiplier, like bringing a demon in against Final Boss Gowther because they get dealt 300% more damage. You can still do it, and people still farm the lower difficulties of Final Boss Gowther when they're at work or at school using Blue Demon Melee because he's still an amazing farming unit. He's got high AoE DPS, but it's not recommended. But otherwise, Red Gowther, Escanor, Green Escanor, and Blue King, you just really can't think of any content that they will not do well in. And Gowther takes the cake, and I do try to rank these characters from best to worst within their own tier, because Gowther, unlike King and Escanor, does any of the death matches perfectly, whereas Escanor really only does Gray, decently well, and then Blue King really only does Red Demon decently well. Gowther is top-notch for all 3 Demon death matches. So he definitely takes the cake there. And then, of course, you know the whole spiel: PvP, PvE, geared, ungeared. The guy, he's just everywhere. The doll is just everywhere. So that does make Gowther the best character in the game, the Jean Grey of 7 Deadly Sins Grand Cross. From there, Exalted tier is just not as good as Sin tier. So these would be characters that just have one flaw, or just may not be, you know, amazing in every single category, but they're still amazing in lots of different categories. They're not necessarily, I mean, by no means are they bad characters, but they're just not as transcendent as the Sin tier. For example, Blue Lilia, she's great for farming, she's great for PvP, both geared and ungeared. Doesn't really have a lot of value for death matches. Sure, you can bring Lily into death matches. She doesn't have 0 value, but you're gonna be probably going slower or not doing as well in the deathmatch if you would have another character in her place that was more efficient and better fitted, right? So if you have a healer, let's say in Grey Demon, you could bring Blue Lily. I'm not saying you should, but you could. But obviously Green Princess Liz is going to do a much better job of healing, not to mention she has the alt orb that she gives the team, so she can ramp your Green King, etc. So it sort of goes without saying, or that's sort of the logic there, that these characters are amazing, but there's just one piece of content in which they're just not going to excel as much. For a lot of these characters, it ends up being death matches. They just don't have a lot of value in death matches. It's not necessarily all of these characters, but for the most part, these characters are not as valuable in deathmatch or in one piece of content, whether it's farming or whether it's PvE content or whether it's geared or gearless PvP. That's basically how it goes. And then starting with the Holy Knights, these are characters that are only going to have, again, very good characters, but they're starting to have fewer uses in terms of being usable for lots of content. I tried not to skew too much towards PvP because I know a lot of tier lists focus heavily on PvP, so I did try to balance things. I still think I do have a bias towards PvP, definitely. That's why, you know, a lot of these units here, pretty much all of these units here can be seen in PvP teams, whereas you get a huge drop-off here. And without considering PvP, Red Griamore would never even be close to the Holy Knight tier. Red Griamore has very little value for now outside of PvP, but he definitely has a ton of value for PvP right now. And you see him on a lot of teams in the backline. So I had to give him props for that. In terms of a tier list, in terms of how often you see a character, like the prevalence rate, he's everywhere in PvP. He is actually everywhere, and he makes a lot of teams better, and he really pushes up a lot of metas, and he props up a lot of teams. So you definitely have to respect him for that. But otherwise, this list is characters that, you know, do a few things well, do a couple of things like extremely well, like Red Lizhawk does Gray and Crimson, or sorry, Red and Crimson Demon so well, and she can do some other content. She's very high single target DPS. She'll be good later on for certain final bosses. You have other characters here. You have obviously the very horrendous Red Melascula, who did me so dirty in that banner, but she has value as well. And that's basically how it goes. But yeah, these characters here, you know, they may be more meme team for PvP. They may not have you know, a really obvious use in all content, but they have value in definite pieces of content that you can use. And then for Knight tier, I sort of just considered that these characters were not as good. They may be only very, very good for one piece of content, or they may be very, very good as a support unit. I almost called this tier the support tier, although not all these characters are support characters, but a lot of them are. Like, for example, Blue Marmus, majority of his job is bringing his 30% HP passive for blue characters. Another example would be someone like Green Cane. Green Cane has decent scaling on one of his abilities, and he's got his ignites, but mainly he's there for that passive, the attacks related stats increase passive that he's going to give you in deathmatch. Another example is Green Aleone. Not a bad character, and his value in the tier list will definitely rise once we get chapter 10 and once we get those reverse stages, because then you have to use Aleone and Twigo and this stuff like that. But for now, these characters just aren't as good because they're not being used in as many positions. You know, most of the time, Twigo is used just as a sub. You can use him, sure, for Crimson now and then. Maybe you could run a mono red team still, but for the most part, he's in the back providing that juicy HP stat bonus and doing that thing there for your team. And it's very sad to see how far Gallant has fallen. He's here. Honestly, he could be a little bit lower, but yeah, the fact that Gallant is all the way in the Knight tier kind of makes me sad. But yeah, blue units have taken a big hit. You can see it's actually really interesting if you look at the distribution of colors because of Escanor and also Merlin and a couple of other characters, Nunchaku Ban as well. But because of the prevalence of green characters, especially in PvP, blue characters are like extinct. There's 6 blue characters in, at least in this tier list, for this the top three rows, right? And then you start to see so many blue characters here. I don't know if that means blue characters need to be like speed characters, need to be rebalanced, but yeah, it's pretty funny to see so many blues here. And you get a lot of greens, actually, a lot of greens in the top 3 tiers. Actually, the most. It's mostly green, and then probably second would be red, and then distant third would be blue. So yeah, that's basically how the tier list works out. Beyond the Holy Knight tier, I didn't try too hard to rank them in terms of their value individually amongst each other. So I just wanted to make that clear as well. So for the Sin tier, Exalted tier, and Holy Knight tier, I did try to say, you know, I think Green Jericho overall is a better unit than Green Lizhawk. And I think that Red Demon Meliodas overall is a little bit better of a unit than Green Jericho. Again, it's my own opinion, it's subjective. And when I say a little bit better, I mean like inches, like really like not very much at all. But beyond the Holy Knight tier, I think it's very, very hard to argue, you know, Blue Bon is this much or that much better than Green Gustav. They have their uses, of course. Is Blue Bon better than Blue Marmus? In most content, yes. And where damage is king, that is going to be the case, but not in all content, right? If you need the support, if you need the HP, obviously Blue Marmus is way better than Blue Bon. But yeah, so I tried to do that for these last 3 tiers. I did try it, well, not this tier, but I did try to say, you know, Red Liz is probably the best of the Squire tier, and Green Ruin and Hugo are probably the worst. But in the nitty gritty, you know, is Red Matrona Diane better than Blue Weinheit? I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% confident in that. But I know, and in my opinion, they both deserve to be in this tier. So yeah, hopefully this has been helpful to you guys. Hopefully it's been interesting to you as well. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know what your suggestions are. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.